Hi there, it's Florence here and I'm back again with another episode of my knitting video podcast. If you haven't been here before, this is basically just a video where I sit and talk about all of my current knitting projects for like 40 minutes. So it's nice to watch while you're doing your knitting or whatever. This also, I don't know if I've mentioned this, is how I learned to knit. Like, I watched a lot of these sorts of videos and picked up all kinds of skills and learned what I should be focusing on. And there was nobody in my life to teach me to knit, so this is where I got it all from. I will start off by talking a little bit about what I'm wearing. I will show anything that I've finished, any projects that I have in progress, anything that I've bought or received lately that relates to knitting as well. If I sound a little bit weird, it's because I'm filming this at like 7 AM on a weekend and I'm pretty tired, but I don't have very much time today and I need to head out to a knitting meetup soon. So I'm just going to jump right into it, get going. As usual, I will start off by mentioning what I am wearing. I only realised after I got dressed that I think this is what I was wearing in the last video, so apologies for the repetition. This is, I think it's called the mixed rib cami. It's something that I knitted freehand and I have had the pattern tested, and I think by the time this video is uploaded the pattern will be available, so I will link it in the description. I've had a lot of questions about this one. If you'd like to make it, the pattern is there, you can. The yarn that I used for this top is the Knitting for Olive merino, not the cotton merino, just the regular old merino. I know that's a bit of a rogue choice for summer knits, but that is what I prefer using. I love how elastic these sorts of fitted camisoles end up being, so you can easily block them back to shape if they start to stretch out. I think that works a little better with the merino than with the cotton merino or the pure silk. Also, your knitting just looks super even and nice, and the colour selection is really beautiful. So yes, I'm a big fan of the Knitting for Olive merino for summer tops. For this one I used the colour, I think it's called Dusty Aqua, but I've been knitting these summer tops pretty much just in like cool toned Knitting for Olive merino for probably 3 or 4 years now. And I still haven't run out of pretty muted blues and greens to use, so that is saying something. Okay, I'll move on to talk about my big finished object for this episode. I have showed this in previous episodes, I think. This is called the Winnie sweater, and it was a test knit that I did for Woozy by Celine. I believe she has a knitting video podcast as well, and some of you guys really enjoy watching her channel. It is her first ever pattern, and this was a test knit, so I was sent the pattern for free, but that's just because I'm knitting it early before release so that I can give feedback. I paid for all the yarn for this myself. I guess I'll start off by talking about the pattern. This is what the jumper looks like. As you can see, it has these slightly flared sleeves, there'll be more on that later, and it has no rib on it at all, so all of the edges have these sorts of non-rolling stockinette edges instead of having any rib to finish them, including the collar. And it has this sort of funnel neck. It then has contiguous shoulder shaping. I've blocked it quite flat, so perhaps it's a little bit hard to see, but that is what the shoulder shaping looks like. So this is similar shaping to if you've done the Petite Knit April cardigan. It's kind of similar to that. I think there are a lot of patterns that use this sort of shaping. I've released a pattern myself using it before as well. You start off by increasing every row, or I guess every round on either side of some stitches to add fabric to the front and back of the jumper. Then you switch to increasing between the markers that separate off those shoulder stitches. So you stop increasing for the body, and so the join between the body and arms comes pretty much directly down like this, and you instead just increase for the sleeves every other round, and then normally finish off with a little raglan shaping to shape the bottom of the armhole. I've mentioned before I really like this shoulder construction. I do think that the fit it gives is quite good. I think it's a very easy way of getting a bit of a set-in sleeve look without having to pick up stitches or seam anything or anything like that. And I generally find I like the look of it a little bit better than a raglan. I did mention in the last episode, and I don't want to repeat myself too much, but this was a test knit, and it was in particular a test knit for somebody's first ever pattern. And so I wasn't really sure how it would be, but I must say this pattern was written really excellently. There were no real issues with it, even in testing. And obviously I would expect it to be modified and improved slightly before the actual release, which I assume is fairly soon. There was sort of one issue that I had with the pattern, and I do find it very hard when I've test knitted something to speak about the pattern in the video, because I don't know if this is something that will be modified by the time the pattern is released. It's very possible, but at least for me, I am a little bit shorter. I mean, I'm around average height, to be honest, but I feel like most people read it as short. I'm about 163 centimeters tall. And the sleeves actually have increases down them to give them a flared shape rather than the decreases you'd normally see on sleeves. And the only issue I had with this pattern is that these increases started late enough on the sleeve that I didn't manage to do all of them before I had to bind off, because the sleeves were at the required length for me. So I would just say be a little bit careful. I don't think this is particularly the designer's fault. I don't think there's much that you can do about it. Just if you are on the shorter side, maybe consider starting the increases a little bit early so that you can fit them all in, so that you really get that flared sleeve effect, because it wasn't something that I really wanted to miss out on. I think that the non-rolling stockinette hems are a really nice touch and really suit the style of this piece. I don't think the flared sleeves would have worked so well with rib, as it has a tendency to really cinch in, so this is a great way of highlighting that detail. I do find that the bottom hem on the body has a very slight tendency to flip up if you're not paying attention, but I don't find it happens often enough to bother me, and I've had no issues with the collars or the cuffs. So this non-rolling stockinette hem technique is probably something that I would use again for another project if I was knitting something where I felt like this is a particularly suitable way of finishing edges. In terms of sizing, I knitted this in the size extra small, which I think is the smallest size. I'm not particularly small, so I generally hope that patterns have a size smaller than my size. This one didn't, but I think my gauge was slightly too large. I was actually expecting, based on my gauge swatch, that my gauge would be a little bit too tight and the jumper might come out a little bit smaller than expected, but actually I think it ended up being just a bit of a fraction of a stitch too big. It's not a huge issue. I think the jumper overall fits me quite well. But definitely don't look at this on me and think, oh, if it's that size on you, then there's no chance there will be a size for me. The extra small, I think, should be a little bit smaller than this. I've also seen the versions that a lot of the other test knitters have completed, and I do think they look really great. So I think a lot of people will really like this pattern. If it is a style that you're interested in, definitely check it out when it releases, because I can certainly vouch for the pattern quality. Oh, and one other thing, there is a video linked in the pattern for doing these hems, which I found really helpful, because it is something that's a little bit hard to follow from just written instructions. But the video made it super clear, so I would say this is a relatively beginner-friendly piece, as long as you're somewhat comfortable with roughly how that contiguous shoulder shaping is constructed. I forgot to pick up a spare ball of yarn to show, so that's a shame. The yarn that I used for this is Hurst from Camarose. This is a Danish yarn, I believe, and it's mostly cotton, which is very unusual for me. It's one of those, I'm very annoyed I don't have any to show actually. It's one of those sort of chainette yarns with some wool blown through it, woven through it, I don't know. It doesn't feel like a conventional blow yarn, it's a little bit denser and heavier than that. But the point is it's a cotton core and it has wool and cashmere, I think that's it, going through it. I will look it up so that I don't give you any false info on this. It's 75% organic cotton, 16% recycled wool and 9% cashmere, 120 meters per 50 grams, which I think is an okay yardage for this sort of DK weight-ish yarn. The gauge, it says, is 17 to 18 stitches per 10 centimeters. I found that that's fairly accurate, maybe a little bit tighter. I bought it from Loop in London, and the color I use is 8200 Marmor. Here is a picture of what it looks like in the ball. It's kind of speckled, which I think works really well for a piece like this because there is no ribbing or anything really. It's just a big expansive, very clean looking stockinette. I felt like a yarn with a little bit of visual interest would really be highlighted on a project like this. And so that slightly speckly Camarose Hurst really worked perfectly. It's somewhere between a blue and a grey, which is the sort of colour that I really enjoy and I think looks really pretty. And the yarn was a little tricky to work with, only because it is cotton based and a sort of chainette-ish yarn, so it can't be spliced together. And I did find that there were quite a few ends because I had to cut knots out from time to time. I think one skein was much worse than the others, so maybe I just got unlucky, but there were quite a few knots that I had to cut out, and so I did end up having to weave in a number of extra ends based on that. Because that would not have got me to gauge for this jumper on its own, I held it with Isager silk mohair, which I'm not going to talk at great length about because I've talked about Isager silk mohair many times on this channel. I think it's one of the best silk mohairs out there, as long as you don't mind the colour selection, which I think is a little bit lacking, at least compared to other silk mohairs like Knitting for Olive. It is probably the softest silk mohair that I've tried. One thing that I will say is I don't remember in the past ever seeing the Isager silk mohair particularly shed, but when I was blocking this, there was just so much mohair coming off it. I had like little hair balls getting caught on my fingers. It was very weird. Now it's been blocked and it's dry, I'm not noticing that so much. With these mohairs, I generally find it sheds quite a lot the first time you wear it, so you don't want to be, say, hanging out with a man in a black suit because they will end up covered in fluff. But the more you wear it, the less it sheds. And the reason I wanted to hold this with mohair, aside from bulking it out to meet gauge, is that this Hurst is kind of fluffy in texture. And so I worried that if there was any pilling or shedding, you can't really shave it without removing that fluffiness. I mean, I guess it's mostly cotton and cotton isn't really going to pill like wool, but I was worried that some of the cashmere and the wool in it, since it is very soft, might start to come a little loose. And so the idea was that adding a layer of mohair fluff over the top of that would be almost like a protective layer to keep it all in place. And then if the mohair starts to shed, you tend to just get little fluffy tangly bits that you can cut off with scissors, and you don't have to worry about shaving it. We'll see if that ends up being a wise decision, but mohair generally does make pretty much all yarn wear a lot better, so I expect that this will wear pretty okay. So yes, that is the Winnie sweater by Lucy by Celine. I will briefly mention, I did, I think in the last episode, talk about this particular piece. This is the book club cardigan by Sorry Nordland, which I cast on for a book club cardigan knit-along that's being hosted by somebody now on Instagram. I really haven't progressed maybe at all on it since the last episode. I don't actually remember where I was at when I showed it in the last episode. I think maybe I did on the back panel, so if that's the case, I have picked up stitches and done a little bit of the front right shoulder panel. That is it. I'm not too concerned about this. I'm definitely prioritizing other things, and when I signed up for this knit-along, I did so with the knowledge I wouldn't actually be completing this cardigan within the knit-along time frame. This is a longer term project that I can put down and go back to, and I am pretty okay with that. Also, I feel like with these sorts of knit-alongs, it's quite nice to just watch other people's progress on the group chat and take in all of the tips that they have in terms of like modifications that they're making, because there are a lot happening for this cardigan in the knit-along. A lot of people are increasing the sleeve size, knitting sleeves from a couple of sizes up relative to the body that they're knitting, and I think that this may well be something that I do. I hate a skinny sleeve on an oversized garment. So it's good to listen to other people talking about it, so I know that I might have to do that, and I can knit the armhole a little deeper than expected or anything like that. Something else that people have been talking a lot about in the group chat, oh, I have dropped my yarn, which I can actually talk about since I have got past this point. So this has a cabled design. It has these big diamond cables, and you start off by knitting this back piece, you increase to shape the shoulders, and then you knit down in this direction. And then you pick up stitches along this shoulder seam and start working this way. And if you do so exactly according to pattern, which is what I did, you'll notice that these diamonds don't really pattern match. Like this new diamond just starts and then it's cut off by the shoulder seam, and then you move on to a fresh diamond for the shoulder. And honestly, I don't think that looks particularly bad at all. I don't think I will regret not doing any modifications, but a lot of people in the group chat have some very cool ideas and have recharted bits of it and all kinds of things to get the most seamless cable pattern traveling over the shoulder, which I think is super cool. And that's the sort of thing you're going to find if you're participating in a knit-along. There are a lot of very experienced knitters who will offer good advice to people who aren't so familiar with knitting these sorts of things. On that note, I'm actually thinking of hosting a knit-along. I've never really hosted a proper formal knit-along before, but since the Olympics are coming up, I thought that would be a really good excuse to do a small knit-along for the Dala of Norway Olympic ski jumpers. Every time I say ski jumper, it sounds so weird because it makes me think of like ski jumping, the sport, but I do try to resist the temptation to say sweater because that's not what I call them here in the UK. Anyway, the Dala of Norway jumpers that were designed for the ski teams for the Olympics and the World Championships I've talked a lot about on this channel. I thought that it might be fun to do like a proper formal knit along. I had a group chat with other people knitting them before when I was working on the Albertville 1992 jumper, but I really want to cast on and knit another. I mentioned before, in fact I think in the last episode I showed a small swatch for the Lillehammer 1994 Winter Olympics jumper. And so I think I will host a proper knit along where you can sign up for it and I'll put everybody in a group chat and I'll come up with some prizes or something for 1 or 2 competitors. Competitors? That sounds rather aggressive. I'll come up with some prizes for 1 or 2 participants who I will randomly select, I guess. The reason I wanted to do it, aside from the fact that I'm really wanting to knit the Lillehammer 1994 and it's a big project and I want company while I work on it, is that I've had a lot of messages from people who say they really like the jumper, but it looks really hard and they're really intimidated by it. And genuinely, I think this is probably one of the easiest colourwork knitting projects you could possibly make. It's 3 big stockinette tubes that you cut up with scissors and sew together. It's super straightforward. And so I thought it might be really nice to have a group chat where perhaps some people who've knitted similar things before or who are just a little bit more experienced can help out people who are intimidated by it, so that hopefully they're not so put off by how complicated these projects look before you dive into them. I'll put a picture here of the one that I'm knitting. I've showed it quite a few times before. This is the Lillehammer 1994 jumper. But I will eventually do some sort of sign up for this knit along, and I'll probably do it on Instagram since I assume that's where the group chat for the knit along will be based anyway, so it will probably be aimed at people who use Instagram. Hopefully that is okay. That was a little bit of a tangent, but I guess I'll move on to talk about one of my other work in progress pieces. I have 2 more work in progress pieces to show, and both of them are pieces that I did not have in the last episode. I guess I will start off with this one. So I have not actually knitted that much in the last few weeks, and part of the reason is that I went on a work trip to Stockholm again, and so when I was there I was super busy, but I wanted to take a knitting project that was small enough to fit inside my handbag that I can carry around with me for knitting, you know, on break times, when I'm on a plane, when I'm at the airport, things like that. For that, I guess socks would be the conventional choice, but I have another pair of socks on the go that I will talk about shortly, and they're not very practical for carrying around due to the large volume of yarn that is required. And I thought that a summer top might be a very easy and practical option. Definitely still a project that can fit in my handbag, and something that I generally enjoy knitting a bit more, and I will certainly get a lot of wear out of. I also don't want to be knitting anything freehand or original when I'm on a trip. I don't want to have to be doing maths at the airport. I just want to be able to follow a pattern. And so I just picked a pattern by a designer who I know that I like, whose summer tops I have knitted before, and a yarn that I'm super familiar with. So this may not be the most exciting project, but it was guaranteed to be a success at least. This is the, what is it even called? Is it the lined loop top? It's the something loop top, as they are all called. The pattern is by Other Loops, who names all of her patterns that way. I've previously knitted the twist loop top. I'll pop a picture of it here, which I really, really love. I've spoken a lot about this top. I knitted it in Drops Flora because I had some in stash and I wanted to get rid of it. This was still when I used Drops yarn a lot more, when I was on more of a budget. In the colour White Fog, which is very pretty, but you do not want to be wearing a 35% alpaca, 65% wool yarn in the summer. So this top actually gets a lot of wear. I normally wear it, I have like a similarly coloured v-neck cardigan. I normally wear it underneath the cardigan, so you get to see the cable detail on the front, and I wear it in the winter that way, and it looks really great. But obviously this time I was going to pick a more sensible yarn, now that I have a bit more budget. So this is the Knitting for Olive merino. Again, this one is marzipan. I think this one is called navy or something along those lines. Now, I should certainly have swatched before starting on this because I'm a little bit concerned about this navy bleeding really badly into the marzipan. I did try asking on my Instagram stories. I always just ask things on my Instagram story. I really make the most of having an audience who have knowledge on a lot of things. I asked whether people have knitted with this combination of yarns and whether they had any issues with bleeding, and Weirdly, the answers were very split. I had a lot of answers from people who didn't use this exact combination, saying that knitting with olive doesn't generally bleed for them, which I mean is also my experience, although I normally knit with lighter colours only. Then I had a few people who knitted with this navy in particular saying that it bled terribly, and a few people saying they knitted with this navy and it didn't bleed at all. So that is great. To be honest, I think even if it turns the water blue or something, it's probably not an issue. My Albaville 1992, which is a very similar, very dark blue colour, that's from Isager though, it's the Isager Jensen, that did bleed in that it turned the water blue, and when I tried to press water out of the jumper with towels, it stained the towels blue. But it's a blue and white colourwork jumper, and the white in the colourwork looks pretty much fine, I think. So I'm hoping that will also be the case for this. People have various suggestions, including vinegar and colour catchers, so I will read through them and have a think about what I want to do. Maybe I will retroactively knit a swatch and wash that to see what happens, so that I know what I'm in for before I wash this top. I'll put a picture of what the top is supposed to look like here, since mine doesn't have any edges on the collar or sleeves, so it's very hard to get an idea of the fit. And yes, it is going to look tiny. These tops always look tiny until they're blocked. They are extremely stretchy. So this is what I currently have. Yes, it looks really small. It will stretch out to be top sized once I've washed it for the first time. This is a camisole construction that I'm really familiar with. It's knitted from the top down, so you'll start at the top of the shoulder strap, knit down, and then do the other shoulder strap and top section the same way, join them, knit flat to the bottom of the armhole, and then you pick up stitch at the top and do, well, I think this time you actually do the front first and the back second, but you'll do the other side the same way. These are always supposed to use a, what's it called, magic cast on? Yeah, the one where you cast on 2 needles at once to give the most seamless look over the shoulder. I, quite frankly, cannot be bothered with magic cast on. I find it super fiddly. You could also use a provisional cast on, like the sort you do with a crochet hook and scrap yarn. Again, I find that pretty fiddly. I have done it before when I knitted the camisole number 5 by My Favourite Things Knitwear about 3 years ago. But nowadays when I knit these tops, I literally just do a long tail cast on and then pick up stitches instead of messing around with a provisional cast on. And I'll try and show you what it looks like so you can decide for yourself whether it's worth the effort. That's what the seam looks like, and that's what it looks like on the inside. And bear in mind, this doesn't have the edges added on. It will have wide seamless edges on either side of that join, so I think it's pretty much completely unnoticeable by the time the top's finished. And it does save me a lot of effort. I'm knitting the size extra small again, I think. I always knit these tops in extra small. They are super stretchy. I find that they're pretty forgiving for the most part in terms of sizing. I'd rather have them be a bit on the smaller side, given they are so stretchy, than have them be too loose. I also did add waist shaping in. I will show you. So this top is all over rib. And I don't know if you can see the decreases that I've put into this side. So this is the bottom of the armhole. And I've done all of the waist decreases below that point. Maybe if I show the inside, you'll be able to see better. Possibly. I just personally like my camisoles to be fairly fitted, and so waist decreases are something that I always add in. And I think that they're pretty much completely unnoticeable here, especially with the stripes and stuff going on. For the stripes, I have been doing jogless jogs where you knit into the stitch below after the first round with a new colour. So this is what the beginning of round looks like, in line with that pink stitch marker. You can see there aren't really any visible jogs, and it's underneath the arm anyway, so I don't think it will be that visible. To be honest, the problem is mostly where I do jogless jogs and it interacts with the decreases. There are some looser stitches, which I guess I will adjust afterwards, and I think will mostly block out. So I think it will look fairly clean when it's done. Also, if you're looking at this and thinking, that looks like there are a million ends to weave in, there actually aren't. You can perhaps see here, I carry both colours of yarn all the time, so I never have to break and rejoin the yarn. I just dropped the yarn under my desk, so that's fun. Overall, I think this is turning out really well. I think it's going to be a really cute top. It's just one of those projects that is something that I'm very familiar with. I've knitted a lot of tops that are very similar to this, so I know this will probably turn out how I want it to. And I think it's a very easy colour to wear, something I can easily put on with jeans. It's always going to look good. And stripes are classic, right? I do think this might have some issues with covering bra straps though. This one I'm wearing is fairly good. You can kind of see my bra strap as it moves about a little bit, but at least I don't think it looks too bad if like the edge of the bra strap is peeking out. With these ones, the bra situation has to be a little bit more involved if you're going to wear one at all. And I do find that makes me reach for these camisoles less than other ones I have that are a little bit wider at the top and offer a bit more coverage. I guess I'm just going to throw the project under my desk now, since the yarn's down there and I'm plugged into my camera so I can't get up and pick it up. This is definitely going to end up being a slightly shorter video, which is a good thing because I have stuff to be doing. Okay, on to the next work in progress. Have to make sure there's no part of the box visible that is doxing myself. By the way, for this work in progress, both the pattern, which is part of a book, and the yarn were gifted. The pattern was gifted by the book's publisher in the UK. The yarn was gifted by the manufacturer, which is Novita. With that, let's talk about moomin socks. I showed this book in the last episode and I'm not being paid for this. Like, I was gifted this stuff and told to knit a pair of socks, but I'm not getting paid to knit or post about these socks. And I feel I should be, because I've had so many messages from people saying, oh my goodness, either I've never seen this book before and now I've had to go and buy it, or else saying, oh, I didn't know this book was out in English. This book is now out in English if you would like to pick it up. It's like 15 quid. I will say, I found out that, I think, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, this book was previously published in maybe multiple other languages, but definitely in Finnish. And the concept for this book, I believe, in the original version, was that there is a sock for every letter of the alphabet, which I think is much cuter, but obviously doesn't work in English as there are 29 socks in this book. Anyway, this is a whole book of DK weight moomin socks. I think they're all knitted with the same moomin themed yarns from Novita. Novita do a lot of DK weight sock yarn. Specifically, they do a lot of moomin themed DK weight sock yarn. And there are therefore like a lot of charts in this book for knitting socks with different moomin characters on them. How cute are these Hattie Fastener socks? They're very cute, right? Or these ones, which I really want to make next. These are the Snufkin fishing socks. They're super cute. And I was saying in the last episode, you could totally put this chart onto a jumper or something, like maybe round a yoke or around the bottom of a jumper if you wanted to do a Snufkin jumper. Anyway, I was allowed to pick any pattern from here that I wanted to knit, and I was sent yarn support for it. And because I don't really own any colourful yarn at all, I thought I would go ahead and pick a really colourful sock because I don't have the scrap yarn to knit these socks, due to me always knitting with blue and beige basically. And so I was going to have to buy like 6 colours of yarn to knit these socks, and I was like, let's get yarn support for this one so that they at least send me the yarn to knit these socks. These are the Moomin House socks. I love these. They have like a stitch pattern on the cuff that kind of looks like roof tiles to be the roof of the Moomin House. And I think that these socks are like oddly practical to knit actually. For example, there aren't too many long floats. You can see they have this pattern on the sole of the foot for that. You will definitely have to catch a few floats when you're working on the blue section up here, but you only ever knit with 2 colours at a time, so any third colour details are done with duplicate stitch, like this little porch roof or the centres of all of the flowers. And as a result, like, I thought that these patterns might be novelty at the expense of ease of knitting, but at least the one that I'm knitting is very well thought out to be a pretty pleasant knitting experience. The yarn was, as I said, gifted by Novita. This is the yarn that I'm using, Moomin Novita Moomin House yarn. Packaging looks like this. Actually, some of the packaging is different. Some of it has this sort of design instead. This stuff is honestly pretty affordable. If you've watched my podcast for a while, I've knitted a lot of socks in my time, and I generally have a preference for very basic sock yarn that's just woolly wool plus nylon. Keep it simple like that. I really like regular sock yarn. This does suit my taste pretty well and it's very affordable, so if you're looking for a DK sock yarn, I would probably recommend it. This has 225 meters per 100 grams. It's just 75% wool and 25% polyamide. Now, the problem with this sock pattern is that it's one size. It says it's for a size UK 3.5 to 4, which is an EU 36 or 37. I'm not a UK size 3.5, 4. I'm about a UK size 7. I have big feet. And obviously when it comes to socks like this, you can kind of knit them to your preferred length. For this pair in particular, you can see there's this sort of flower motif. I'll just like add probably one extra flower, and that's going to be quite close to the correct length. And if not, I can just adjust the amount of green that comes after the last flower. But the fact it says that it's for a UK size 3.5, 4 makes me feel like it's also going to be a smaller sock in terms of circumference. And I've mentioned this before on this channel, I've done quite a bit of colourwork knitting. I've knitted a lot of socks, and yet I've never knitted a colourwork sock because I am deeply afraid of the sock not being stretchy enough to put on. I think that DK socks are probably quite a gentle introduction to this, and so this might be a good project for me to try, but I really wanted to make sure that the sock would be big enough. And so this sock says to knit it on 3mm needles. I'm knitting it on 4mm needles, and the reasons why I'm doing that are, firstly, I always go up a 0.5 millimeter when I'm knitting colourwork, like relative to the plain stockinette, because my gauge does just pull a bit tighter in colourwork. So if it says to 3mm needles, I should probably be using 3.5. And then also, because I have much bigger feet than the model, I figured I'd just stick an extra 0.5 millimeter on there. So I'm doing them on 4mm needles, and I have tried them on and they seem to fit pretty okay. I think it's as good of a fit as I could have hoped for. I still did the cuff on 3mm needles just because I was worried about it flaring out too much, and if anything, that is the part where I could probably have gone up a needle size, but I think it'll be fine, so I'm not going to frog. Okay, that's enough talk about the moomin socks. I'll get out my moomin sock in progress. Obviously, these socks are rather colourful. I don't know how to describe it. It's not even just the fact they have a lot of colours, it's that these colours are very... How do I say this nicely? I feel like this is like the colour of yarn you'd buy at John Lewis, not at an expensive yarn shop, you know what I mean? It's a little bit like, I don't know, something you might use to do some knits for a baby, or maybe even a strong colour for that. It doesn't give like expensive premium yarn, because it's not, honestly. This is like affordable, good, standard yarn. I feel like you could maybe make a more muted colour moomin house that I'd be more likely to wear, but I'm actually having quite a lot of fun knitting these extremely bright moomin socks. This is where I'm at, and I just cast this on at like 8:30 p.m. last night and knitted it for like an hour or two. So they are moving very quickly. I've done the sort of faux cable-y stitch pattern, which gives the look of roof tiles. That is super cute. I really like that as a detail. And yeah, my tension is maybe not the best, but I think it looks pretty okay so far. And I'm having a lot of fun knitting these. I've mentioned before I like to use chiaogus for knitting socks, like the metal chiaogu needles, because the cables are really nice for magic loop. I don't have 4mm chiaogus, so I'm using my C-knit interchangeables that I really love. And yes, I think they look really great. I've been catching my floats a lot. I find that I like to catch floats pretty often. I like how it makes the inside of the fabric look, and I like the fact that it means nothing will get caught on the floats as you're putting the socks or jumper or whatever it is you're making on. I worry a little bit that that might affect the stretchiness. I follow Stone Knits on Instagram. I'm sure you've heard of Stone Knits. If not, she does like novelty patterned socks, which are all done in colourwork. And I think I've heard her saying, or I bought one of her patterns and I never knitted it, so I have at least read one pattern. I think it said not to catch floats, as well as knitting the sock inside out to make the floats a little longer. I have done neither of those things, but I have been trying the sock on as I go, so I think it will be okay. If I do have any issues, I will only have myself to blame. So yes, that is a Moomin House sock in progress. I do kind of have a deadline for getting this done where they want to post about it on Instagram, but to be honest, this yarn took forever to arrive from Helsinki, and so I had to start a little bit late. We'll see how quickly I can get this sock done, but it should be fairly close to the top of my priority list. Now, that is kind of it for active work in progress pieces that I've done a lot on this week. I have a lot of inactive work in progress pieces that I need to go back and finish, so hopefully I will do more of that over the next few episodes. It was my last day of work yesterday before I have pretty much 2 weeks of annual leave, which I'm really excited about. I'm going to go to Wales for a week with my family, and then I'm going to Helsinki for a week. And so I need to prepare a lot of knitting projects, particularly for Wales, where I think there'll be a lot of sitting about and knitting together. And so I was thinking out what I might want to knit on this trip. And I think I'm going to freehand a cabled jumper. I've spoken about this before, how I really want to do a asymmetric cable jumper. I think I've been talking about it for about 1.5 years now, which is slightly cringe. But I'm actually going to do it now. I promise it's going to happen. It's just something that requires quite a lot of thought before you can dive into it. Like in terms of charting, you are going to have to do some charts before you start. I have a pretty good idea of the construction I want to do, and that should be quite straightforward. I have also chosen the yarn. The yarn I'm going to use is from Knitting for Olive again. This is the colour Marzipan, which I think is the same colour I used for that striped camisole I'm working on. But this is the heavy merino, which is a worsted weight merino. I think it knits up to about an 18 stitch gauge. It's a little bit less soft than the regular Knitting for Olive merino, but I really like it. It's not super soft, but it's also completely non-scratchy, which I find to be a really nice combination. And I'm going to hold that with silk mohair. I think cables in wool plus silk mohair just look so elegant. This is also Knitting for Olive, and it's also the colour Marzipan. I do have these in a number of different dye lots, so we're going to see how it looks. It might have somewhat of a handmade look to it, which is okay. I thought this would be good because firstly the colour will show the cables really beautifully. It's not a yellow cream at all, it's very much a sort of grey cream. I find that yellow cream colours don't suit me. These sort of looks like a white that went through the wash with something black kind of creams are a much better colour for me. And I think this will knit up really fast as well. I'm going to do it on, I think, 5mm needles, so it should be a fairly speedy project. I'm hoping I can get through a lot of it while I'm on holiday. I'm also going to be taking the moomin socks, so we'll see how much time the moomin socks take up, but this will be my second project after that, I guess. Oh, and maybe the striped camisole. I might just take a lot of knitting with me, we'll see. So I knitted a swatch. I went ahead and knitted this swatch on 5mm needles in double moss stitch, I believe it's called. And I have washed and blocked it. I need to measure it. I don't think there'll be any surprises though. I've used this exact yarn combination for a lot of things before. I really like this yarn a lot. I did manage to mess up my double moss stitch swatch, which is a little concerning. Like, if I can't knit this little rectangle of double moss stitch correctly, how am I going to do a freehand asymmetric cable jumper? But I think it'll be fine. I've knitted a lot of cabled things with double moss stitch in them before with no issues. Yeah, I just really like how the stitches look with this yarn combination. It's super, super pretty. And this will be definitely like a winter favourite piece if it turns out how I'm hoping it will turn out. Fingers crossed. This yarn always catches me out with how expensive it is as well. Like, you see the heavy merino, you're like, oh, it's like £8 a ball, that's nothing insane. And then by the time you add mohair in, it ends up being like a £150 jumper, I swear. And that just feels like a lot of money to me. So this needs to turn out well because I spent a lot of money on it. I bought all this from the Oxford yarn store, which is definitely a bit more expensive than buying directly from Knitting for Olive. But the nice thing is I can go into the shop and look at all of the colours and also support a shop in the city I live in, which is great. But yeah, I always end up spending so much money there. It really catches me out. Now, I think that is everything for today. I feel like that was definitely a quick episode. Normally when I say it's a quick episode, it ends up being like almost an hour, but I think this is actually like a half-hour episode, which is kind of cool. Thank you very much for watching. I will be back again soon with another episode. Probably will be 2 to 3 weeks. That's how this normally goes. If you have any recommendations for things to do in Helsinki, particularly food for vegans, do leave a comment. Activities as well, just like anything you recommend in Helsinki, and I will give it a go before the next episode. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.